Hello, I'm Studi from Florida.
And I'm Jamie from New York.
Jamie, if we're so scared about nuclear bombs today, what can explain why no nuclear bombs have been dropped since the ones in Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, you see, the global anti-nuclear movement by citizens like you and I is attributed with the prevention of nuclear war since 1945.
The what?
The anti-nuclear movement. This is a phenomenon that occurred globally, but if we analyze how it took shape in America, we can see how much of an impact citizen mobilization had on America for disarmament efforts and the demise of nuclear power in the nation.
Wow, was it always a big campaign that most Americans always supported?
Funnily enough, no, not at all. The American anti-nuclear movement started off very small, with very marginal groups. In fact, before the creation of the bomb itself, prominent scientists feared for the consequences of the development of the nuclear bomb. Perhaps you've heard of physicist Niels Bohr?
Yeah.
Well, him, along with other concerned scientists, specifically Leo Szilard from Hungary, anticipated that the bomb would be pretty bad for mankind, that it would precipitate a sort of arms race after the war. And they were indeed correct. In fact, these scientists wrote a report called the Frank Report, which argued against the use of the bomb in Japan. This, however, had little, if any, impact on high-level U.S. government officials.
Why is that?
Well, U.S. government officials disagreed with the scientists. They believed the bomb showcased the nation's military and technological strength, and using it would justify the enormous government expenditure on the Manhattan Project.
So then what happened?
Because of this disagreement, in the final years of World War II, two factions of thought had developed. One was government officials who supported the bomb and saw it as a great opportunity to bolster military strength, and the other was a small group of scientists who believed the bomb was perilous and disastrous.
Wait, did the American people even know about the bomb at this point?
Not before it was dropped on Japan, no. The general American public had no idea what the atomic bomb even was. And actually, as a matter of fact, the public was initially very supportive of the bombings in Japan. People were proud of the country and credited the bombs with ending the war. The public was thrilled at first.
Hang on, then how did anti-nuclear sentiment take root in the American public?
It was all about influence. Even though the public widely supported the bombings at first, earlier critics of the bomb, aka the scientists and some other groups, saw this as an opportunity to oppose and let the public know their views. In fact, 4 separate groups opposed the bomb and spoke out against it.
Who?
The first were obviously the scientists, who joined together to launch the Federation of American Scientists, and Szilard also launched the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, chaired by Albert Einstein. The other 3 were World Federalists, American Pacifists, and religious institutions like the Federal Council of Churches and the Catholic Church.
What did these groups do?
They effectively spoke out against the danger of nuclear war and began to champion ideas of arms control and disarmament.
Did this work?
It certainly seemed to be the catalyst for spurring anti-nuclear sentiment among the public, because in September 1946, only a year after the bombings, 67% of polled Americans supported the strengthening of the UN to prevent all countries, including the US, from making atomic bombs.
Wow, that's a majority.
It certainly is. It's because people took less than a year to realize that nuclear weapons don't discriminate. The people understood that everyone, regardless of age, race, class, gender, or nationality, could be a potential victim of nuclear war, and therefore showed a willingness to accept new thinking about international relations.
Cool. How did the government react then?
Oh, they weren't too happy about it at all. See, the government leaders were shaken by the criticism that people were starting to voice about the bomb. The Truman administration became rather embarrassed and defensive. A general informed congressional committees that radiation poisoning was, quote, a pleasant way to die. And Henry Stimson, Secretary of War, wrote an article that made the case for Hiroshima and Nagasaki in order to provide a positive view of U.S. nuclear weapons.
Did that do anything?
Not too much. At this point, the public was majorly concerned about the prospect of nuclear bombs. However, the movement experienced a sharp decline in the early 1950s.
Why?
The Cold War was escalating, so the public started to grow inclined towards employing nuclear weapons for national defense. Additionally, there was a huge burden of being identified with communism, and people were also exhausted. They wanted to return to their private lives and not give this much attention.
But that wasn't the end of the movement. It couldn't have been.
No, not at all. It was merely the beginning. Even though the movement declined, at this point the nuclear bomb was established as taboo. Its use to annihilate cities had become unacceptable. And don't worry, the anti-nuclear movement came back to life in the mid-1950s.
How come?
The rapid development of the hydrogen bomb in 1954 reminded people that humanity was still in danger and people were afraid again. The movement spiked up.
What happened?
This time, the movement really gained momentum and began to take root in the American public. Famous scientists like Linus Pauling spearheaded debates and talks, and the anti-nuclear sentiment took root in films, leaflets, ads, and novels. Neville Shute's novel On the Beach became a bestseller in 1957. Also in 1957, there was the development of SANE.
What was SANE?
SANE was America's largest, most visible, and most influential peace organization. It called for an immediate suspension of nuclear testing by all countries. SANE jump-started an electrifying response at the American grassroots. Eventually, Americans also turned to civil disobedience by means of protest through groups like Women's Strike for Peace and Student Peace Union.
Let me guess. The government officials were still upset?
Bingo. Government police and intelligence agencies kept nuclear disarmament activities under super close scrutiny. Although the Kennedy administration was a bit more receptive to disarmament activities, they were still uneasy about the agitation against the bomb. But guess what happened again in the late 1960s?
What?
The movement declined once more as media attention shifted to other issues like anti-imperialism, women's liberation, and human rights. Anti-nuclear organizations turned their efforts elsewhere, and nuclear disarmament became of low priority.
But let me guess. It revived a few years later?
Yep, and not only that, it became stronger than ever. In the early 1970s, there was growing public concern about the environmental hazards, and the new environmental consciousness made people demand a safer and cleaner environment. These values provided the ideological strength that kick-started the movement again. SANE also had a burst of energy, and then there came the idea of nuclear freeze.
Nuclear freeze?
Nuclear freeze was an idea that called for the absolute stop of testing, production, and deployment of nuclear weapons. The enthusiasm for freeze spread across America in 1982 and ended in a rally in Central Park that drew as many as 1 million people, making it the largest demonstration in U.S. history.
Wow! What a difference 40 years made.
Exactly. The anti-nuclear movement may have started small, but over time, it was successfully able to grip the anti-nuclear conscience of the American people and people all over the globe. Even though we saw a constant struggle between the people and the government officials over this issue, eventually the citizen movement was able to affect public policy and recognize some real policy triumphs.
How so?
We'll see in the next video.